Clearinghouse webinar. Today's presentation is titled Blending the After Action Review and Critical Incident Stress Debriefing. Your instructor for this webinar is Ms. Amy Morgan, who is currently a training officer for the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Ms. Morgan holds a master's in counseling degree and is a certified trainer for applied suicide intervention skills training, a QPR suicide intervention trainer, and a Crisis Prevention Institute nonviolent physical crisis intervention trainer. Your instructor will compare specific steps to action improvement with the mentally beneficial side of debriefing after a critical incident and will provide a way to blend the two post-incident review methods. On the next slide, and before we begin, I want to share with you some information about the Justice Clearinghouse, one of the key reasons why we're all here today. The Justice Clearinghouse is a peer-to-peer educational program for justice professionals. We ask that if you are not currently a member of the Justice Clearinghouse, that you decide to join after today's event and support our work. And finally, the last thing I want to do is go over some housekeeping items with everyone. First, this event is being recorded and is scheduled to last between 45 and 60 minutes. Second, this is a listen-only event, but you could type in any questions you have through the webinar tool. We'll address as many questions as possible at the conclusion of today's event. And finally, following today's webinar, we will issue a follow-up survey. We ask that you take a moment to complete it, as your feedback will help us shape our future calendar of events. So thank you again for attending. I'd like to introduce our instructor today, Ms. Amy Morgan. Amy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, and I do appreciate everyone being here today. And this is a kind of a complicated technique combination we're going to go through. I'm going to make it as simple as possible and explain it. But like Heather said, any questions you have, you can ask along the way, and we'll try to get to those and make sure everybody has a thorough understanding of the technique. So you may have heard of the after action review or the critical incident stress debriefing technique. These are two very different techniques used for different purposes. What I've done is try to combine them into something that can be used more widespread for a broader audience, I guess you could say. And we'll go over who can use it and how to use it and some techniques and steps. So you might even want to take some notes as we go. The goals and objectives, next slide, sorry. Goals and objectives for this, I'll just read this. This webinar will compare specific action, step to action improvement with the mentally beneficial side of debriefing after a critical incident, and will provide a way to blend the two post-incident review methods. We will cover the facets of conducting an informal after-action review, which helps a small team or a group break down what happened, why it happened, and how it can be done differently next time. Additionally, we will discuss critical incident stress debriefing, which goes beyond the basic action data and is designed to reduce stress in the aftermath of an incident, as well as help to rebuild the team and restore cohesion, which would lead to better future performance. Just a side note, the after-action review and the critical incident stress debriefing were both created by someone else, and we'll go through who. And there's a lot of research on both. I should put my references at the end of this presentation so you can look up some of those. But they're both very complicated. A lot of research has gone into both of them. This is a very surface view of them. So if you want to learn more, you can find all sorts of journal articles and so forth on both of them and really research them and find out more about each of them separately. Next slide, please. So the first thing you want to know when you're learning a technique or learning a new anything basically is who can benefit from it and use the technique. So next slide. One group of people who can use this and who do use these are emergency and crisis workers. So examples of those I've put below, and there are a lot of examples, but crisis center employees, police, fire and rescue, EMT, emergency room physicians and nurses, crisis line employees, social workers, and security officers. I've listed these under emergency crisis workers because these people are the ones, also called first responders, who sometimes end up going right into the crisis itself are there immediately after a crisis. So you're going to be, as one of these types of employees, you're going to be dealing with people, with victims frequently who have just gone through a crisis. Or in these fields, you might find yourself in the line of a crisis. You may be the one that's there throughout the entire crisis and actually can benefit from these techniques yourself, and it's not just for the victims. Next slide. The next group that applies, same thing, is social and public service workers, another just short list, school counselors, school teachers, social workers again, mental health providers, healthcare staff, and correctional employees. So anybody in these areas may go through some sort of crisis event or incident and can benefit from these. Next slide, please. So the other group, those are all people who respond to and help with an incident or maybe involved in an incident. Then we have victims. Victims of critical incidents or critical action are, these are a short list again, there are long lists we could make, but rape victims, abused spouses and children, stalking victims, victims of natural disasters like fire, earthquake, tornado, that sort of thing, workplace violence, and other violent crime. Next slide. So just to point out the limitations, because I don't want to sell this as a technique that is a into every possible thing that might go wrong or the solution to every critical incident. There are as many different outcomes as there are individuals who go through crises, and so this is a standard approach or kind of a checklist way to help someone go after a crisis, but it does have its limitations. So just by the benefit, using a stress debriefing technique immediately following a critical incident is the most helpful to those who either assisted with crisis victims or were part of the incident, but it's actually less helpful to the victims themselves. And this particularly relates to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So this does help, but it's more beneficial, according to research, for those who actually assisted with the crisis rather than were the victims of the crisis. And some crises do not have actual victims, so this is going to apply to everyone who was just involved with the incident. No one technique can solve all of the problems of someone having gone through a critical incident, a traumatic event, or dangerous action. And review and debriefing, which is what we're discussing here today, are meant to be used as immediate first aid. So then you follow up and you provide ongoing resources which need to be implemented and used in order for everything to go as well as possible for someone. And that's where the PTSD for the victims is not as effective, because if you just use these initial techniques and they don't get help afterwards, it's not going to be beneficial. The follow-up is very important. Okay, so we're going to start out with the first technique, which is called after action review. Next slide, sorry. And next slide again. Okay, so the purpose, what it's for, who uses it. The Army developed the concept of after-action reviews as an essential training methodology for soldiers in preparing for both combat duty and ongoing programs such as peacekeeping. And military law enforcement and healthcare facilities like hospitals, even just business managers who don't have anything to do with firearms or emergency situations like hospitals do, but just business managers can benefit from this. First responders, they can all benefit from the use of the after-action review. And first responders is a wide encompassing group. There are a lot of people, like I said, my lists were short, but if you are a first responder, you typically know it. So if there's a team that will continue working as a team, in most cases, in any environment, an after-action review can be beneficial to that team. While we're talking about this today as a more serious topic for critical action events, the AAR, just as an example, could even be useful in areas you wouldn't think of. So a light example I'll give you is the Christmas season at the mall, which I personally try to avoid. It's a crisis to me. If you have a team of people who worked Black Friday, Sale Day, or particularly busy events that you will hold every year, hold an after-action review after that's over, taking notes to use for future reference. This can help you in the next year's event preparation. So that's, like I said, a very light example. Conferences. I put on conferences, training conferences as part of my job. And when one is over, I always sit down immediately with my staff afterwards and review what happened, make notes. I put those notes in next year's planning material so that when I open that notebook up next year and I get ready to plan, I have my list of what I wish I had done, even just ideas to make it better. It reminds us what we wanted to do better, what we needed to do differently, what we needed to improve upon, or what really worked well that we wanted to repeat. Next slide. So the first part of it is learning, the most important part of after-action reviews is learning lessons and improving performance. The after-action review is a group review focused on discussing what the group did correctly, what was done incorrectly, and what needs to be improved for future action. And I keep stressing the word groups because in this review, no blame is placed. The group is a team, and all performance is assessed as group performance. The after-action review is done immediately post-action so that details are better remembered and the lessons learned can be applied right away. The group environment for these is expected to be open to learning, positive, and focused on future improvement. So imagine the group as a family where the siblings may want to blame each other. What really needs to be focused on is what to do going forward and what lessons can be learned. So going into the review with a no-blame attitude, with an open mind to learning, will change the effectiveness and probability of success of an after-action review. Some people like to call it a safe place. Next slide. The after-action review utilizes a facilitator who focuses parts of the group on their specific plan of action and begins the review with the question, what was supposed to happen? I put on there parts of the group because you may not stay as one group the entire time. You may have different subparts of this group that need to break out that maybe each had different purposes within the bigger picture. And so you can break those out and have an after-action review for the subgroups as well as the larger group. The first question is, what was supposed to happen? This is, what was our plan? What did we intend on happening? The facilitator begins the contrast then, if any, by asking what actually happened. So we have our story of what was supposed to happen, and then we have what did happen. The contrast is then brought to light as to what, if any, differences between what was supposed to happen and what actually happened exist. And then the group as a whole reflects on and discusses what can be learned for future events. The facilitator here does not serve as the teacher or the go-to answer provider. The facilitator is there to merely ask the questions and keep the group focused on positive learning progress, as well as maintaining the right environment. Remember, of no blame, no peer pointing. Next slide. So how to use the AAR. The first step is to conduct it immediately. All the people involved in the incident are still available. They're still there, right there. The memories are fresh, and people's interest and their adrenaline are still focused, highly focused on this event. That's the ideal time to have the after-action review. As far as the climate and environment, the ideal climate for an AAR is one of complete openness and a commitment to learning what to do in future opportunities. Removing seniority or rank during the AAR is helpful, if possible. The entire team contributes to the answers with no one having the answer. Everyone is just participating and putting in their thoughts. And no blame is given. Only positive learning is the goal. Next. So once a facilitator is assigned, and I put up their neutral facilitator, this is important. This person's responsibility, like I said, is to ask the right questions and to get the team to openly discuss together. And then ask the 4 questions: what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, make the comparison, as well as why were there differences. You can say what were the differences, but you need to talk about why. What happened that our plan didn't fall into place. There's something we didn't think about might happen. Now we know that it could happen. So there it goes into what did we learn. Identify and discuss the successes as well as the shortfalls. So you don't want to just point out everything that didn't go the way you planned it to. You want to say, this was our plan, and this actually happened. We planned for this to take place and to respond to it in this manner, and that actually worked. And so you want to continue that. You want to continue the things that did work. You need to point those out as well. Put in place a plan of action to sustain the successes and to improve upon the shortfalls. Next. So how to record? This has been asked. How do you record this session, this after-action review? Key elements may be recorded. And I just say key because you don't probably want to tape record it, digitally record it, or write down every word. You write down the key elements, the things that you learned, the things you need to remember, and you're writing them down for the sake of remembering them. Key elements may be recorded for future reference. For instance, the basic answers to the 4 questions asked. This helps refresh the information if needed and records the details that are an essential part of the immediate AAR following the action. We all know that memories fade and change, and recording the details that are provided immediately can help keep those details more accurate. However, the other side of it is some after-action reviews do not get recorded. Depending on the team and its purpose, some groups prefer to keep it very open as only a discussion, and they don't wish for notes and structure to have to be a part of it. This is beneficial in providing an environment of trust and confidentiality about what is said within the group, which can help a lot with your group cohesion. Next. So why do we want to have this AAR immediately after the incident? And I've put out the basics there, but I'm going to read you a little story. And this is a 2-slide story, so it's not long. You're driving your car, a friend seated in the front next to you at night going through a fairly small town. As you drive through, you notice the movie theater doors open and people start coming out, heading off into different directions. Your friend shouts, "Hey," and you look up to see that your traffic light has turned red, so you slam on your brakes. People cross the street in all different areas and directions, and as the light turns green, there are still a few people crossing in front of you, so you wait. A car comes up behind you at regular speed, sees the green light, but doesn't realize you are stopped, and so barrels into the back of your car, forcing your car to lunge forward and hit the couple walking in front of your car. You throw your car into park and jump out to see if they're okay, but one of them is not moving. You start yelling for someone to call 911, and you feel panicked and worried. The crowd gathers around, and the person who is in the car behind you comes and starts yelling. Also in a panic, but trying to blame you for being at a stop at a green light, blaming people for walking all over the small town street at night with cars driving through, showing no concern personally for the people who have been hit. He keeps yelling and then gets in his car and drives off. What seems like an hour passes and an ambulance arrives and declares one person deceased. The other is loaded into the ambulance and rushed off to the local hospital. So you've just been through this traumatic incident. This is one example, and there are a million different examples of types of traumatic incidents. So you've just put yourself through this one. And so you're going to want to tell someone this story. Next slide. If first responders appeared, sorry, go back one. One more, sorry, Erin. If first responders appear right then and then take you to a calm, non-judgmental environment, so maybe a room inside the movie theater, for instance, where you can sit calmly, you can breathe deeply, you can reflect on what happened, and you're asking what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, where is the contrast, and what could be learned or done differently. Rather than saying, what did you do? How did you kill this person? You would be more likely to want to talk about it in a non-blaming environment. By reviewing the incident immediately, all of these details are fresh in your mind, and you are still right there on the scene where the incident happened. All the witnesses are still there and available, and they may be hard to track down the next day. If this incident happened and you were called to talk about it a week later, how many fewer details would you be able to provide than you would immediately? So this is food for thought as to answer the question, why immediately? And also, while we're looking at this, think of the people that were involved in this, who all might benefit from this after-action review. So it's not just the person driving the car and the person with them, but also maybe some of the people that were standing by that saw those two get hit by the car. Maybe the 911 operator that answered the call. It may be the ambulance personnel that came to the call. So there are a lot of people involved that were there that may benefit from this after-action review. Okay, now next slide. Sorry. Okay, so that's the after-action review. We're going to go into the next technique that is being combined here, and this is called the Critical Incident Stress Debriefing. This is a very, like I said, complex. There is a lot of research and data on critical incident stress debriefing. You can find a lot of material on it to learn about it. Next slide. So what is a critical incident? We've given you one example, but other examples is sudden death in the line of duty, serious injury from a shooting, a physical or psychological threat to the safety or well-being of an individual, business, or community. And then it can affect people at different levels. And talking about the dosage exposure, I'll explain. So this can involve any situation or event faced by emergency, public safety personnel, responders, or employees that causes a distressing, dramatic, or profound change or disruption in their physical, physiological, or psychological functioning. I'm going to read that again. This can involve any situation or event faced by emergency, public safety personnel, or responders, or employees that causes a distressing, dramatic, or profound change or disruption in their physiological or psychological functioning. They are oftentimes unusually strong emotions attached to the event, which have the potential to interfere with that person's ability to function, either at the crisis workplace scene or away from it at home. This is what we call dosage exposure. The closer the employee or the victim is to the critical incident, the stronger or weaker the reaction. So bio, psychosocial, and cultural they will have to the event. If you know the person, for instance, that was hit by the car, you may have a much different level of exposure than someone who was standing over on the sidewalk who'd never seen them before who saw it happen. Next. So how does it affect people? Clinically traumatic events and their impact on individuals are predictable. And actually this is a good thing because this means we can set up a standard way to help. When a person has been exposed to a critical incident, either briefly or long-term, this exposure can have a considerable impact on their global functioning. Historically, some of the first documented cases of traumatic stress, or what used to be called transient situational disturbance, can be traced to military combat. In time, researchers began to find evidence that emergency workers, public safety personnel, and responders to crisis situations, rape victims, abused spouses and children, stalking victims, media personnel, as well as individuals who were exposed to a variety of critical incidents like fire, earthquake, floods, industrial disaster, and workplace violence, also developed their short-term crisis reactions. So some of these examples: shock, and these are short-term again, denial, anger, rage, sadness, confusion, terror, shame, humiliation, sorrow, suicidal or homicidal ideation, restlessness, fatigue, frustration, fear, guilt, blame, grief, sleep disturbance, eating disturbance, muscle tremors, reactive depression, nightmares, profuse sweating episodes, heart palpitations, vomiting, diarrhea, hypervigilance, paranoia, phobic reactions, problems with concentration or anxiety, flashbacks and mental images of the traumatic events, and startle responses. Next. So there are two types of ways to deal with this, and they're very similar, but one is debriefing and one is diffusing. Debriefing is a specific technique designed to assist others in dealing with the physical or psychological symptoms that are generally associated with trauma exposure. Debriefing allows those involved with the incident to process the event and reflect on its impact. Ideally, debriefing can be conducted on or near the site of the event. Diffusing, on the other hand, is another component of critical incident stress debriefing, which allows for the ventilation of emotions and the thoughts associated with the crisis event. Debriefing and diffusing should be provided as soon as possible, but typically no longer than the first 24 to 72 hours after the initial impact of the critical event. As the length of time between exposure to the event and the technique increases, the least effective the technique becomes. Therefore, the closer temporal relationship between the critical incident and diffusing and initial debriefing is imperative for these techniques to be most beneficial and effective. Research on the effectiveness of applied critical incident debriefing techniques in the workplace has demonstrated that individuals who are provided this within a 24 to 72-hour period after the initial critical incident experience less short-term and long-term crisis reactions or psychological trauma. Subsequently, emergency service workers, rescue workers, police and fire personnel, as well as the trauma survivors themselves who do not receive critical incident stress debriefing are at a greater risk of developing many of the clinical symptoms that has been outlined. Next. So critical incident stress debriefing goes by a 7-part, 7-step model. I'll read these. Number 1, assess or audit the impact of the critical incident on support personnel and survivors. The debriefer assesses individuals' situational involvement, their age, their level of development, and degree of exposure to the critical incident or the event. Consider that different ages of the individuals, for example, one may respond differently based on their developmental understanding of a critical event. Second, identify immediate issues surrounding problems involving safety and security. Issues surrounding safety and security surface, particularly with children. Feeling safe and secure is of major importance when suddenly, without warning, families and employees' lives are shattered by tragedy and loss. So third, use diffusing to allow for the ventilation of thoughts, emotions, and experiences associated with the event and provide validation of possible reactions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Ventilation and validation are important to individuals as each, in their own way, needs to discuss their exposure, sensory experiences, their thoughts, and their feelings that are tied to the event. Ventilation and validation are necessary to give the individual an opportunity to emote. So number 4, predict events and reactions to come in the aftermath of the event. This is helpful. The debriefer assists the employee, survivor, or support personnel in predicting future events. This involves educating them about discussing possible emotions, reactions, and problems that they may experience after this traumatic exposure. By predicting, preparing, and planning for the potential psychological and physical reactions surrounding the stressful critical incident, the debriefer can also help the employee survivor prepare and plan for the near and long-term future. This may help avert any long-term crisis reactions provided by the incident itself. Next slide. Conduct a systematic review of the critical incident and its impact emotionally, cognitively, and physically on survivors. And you're going to look for maladaptive behaviors or responses to the crisis or trauma. The debriefer should conduct a thorough and systematic review of the physical, emotional, and psychological impact. And I say systematic, this is stressed because like I said, these are very predictable responses, and so we do have a systematic ability to help with those. The debriefer should carefully listen and evaluate the thoughts, the mood, the affect, the choice of words, and the perceptions of the survivor of a critical incident, and look for potential clues suggesting problems in terms of managing or coping with the tragic event upon the impact and in the near future. Number 6, a sense of closure is needed. Bring closure to the incident, anchor or ground support personnel and survivors to community resources to initiate or start the rebuilding process, which is where we really want to go, and help identify possible positive experiences from the event. Assistance with a plan for future action is provided to help the employee survivor. I keep saying employee survivor, it's any survivor, anybody exposed, during times of high workplace adjustment and stress following the incident. And number 7, debriefing assists in the re-entry process back into the community or workplace. This indicates that there may be a time where they need to remove themselves from the workplace or the community or whatever they daily do. The debriefer and the use of debriefing assists in the short-term and long-term recovery as well by assisting the survivor on the reentry process. A thorough review of the events surrounding the traumatic situation can be advantageous for the healing and the recovery process to begin. Next. So we'll talk just a slight bit about trauma. Next. Strong reactions to trauma are not always immediate. And so you've heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's post-trauma. As with any man-made, natural, or accidental catastrophic event, many experience and do suffer from short-term crisis reactions. Others, depending on their dosage exposure like we discussed, may need attention for a psychiatric disorder called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, what is shortened. PTSD as a disorder can be difficult to diagnose, and its onset can be acute or delayed. Without detection, the prevailing symptoms can be chronic. It can involve a host of other symptoms, syndromes, such as sleep disturbance, anxiety, acute reactive depression, and phobic disorder. Some survivors and their families cannot be left alone because of overwhelming fear, loss of personal control over their environment, their community, their lives, their livelihood. Almost everyone in a close, tight-knit business community will know someone who has been affected, hurt, seriously injured, or perhaps who might have died. PTSD can be obvious in some survivors, and in other cases, PTSD can also exist at a more subtle level, only surfacing when a memory or some sensory stimuli triggers it. It is something a specialist must look for and assess frequently when a critical or catastrophic incident occurs in the workplace or nearby community. We'll talk a bit about finding resources. So when I said earlier that victims are less likely to be assisted by these techniques long-term than emergency personnel or responders, it's often because they don't get help, they don't have the resources in place, or because this is delayed reaction. And so the only people, if you don't have the resources in place, the only people seeing the reactions that are delayed are possibly family members who don't know what to look for. So they don't know when they may be seeing signs of this. This is one more reason why it's good to have resources in place and keep them in place long term to help over the long haul. Next. So now what I've done is tried to combine an after-action review, which is a very black and white, what happened, what needs to be done differently, learning experience, with the critical incident stress debriefing, which is a mental health dealing with emotions and dealing with long-term mental health effects and needs of having gone through some trauma. So I've called this post-action strategic debriefing, strategic being the part where you plan ahead, and still the debriefing, which is getting the mental health assistance. Next. The blended technique, post-action strategic debriefing, combines the after-action review techniques, still keeps the open, learning-focused environment, comparing and contrasting what was planned to have happened with what actually happened, while assessing what can be done in future events, with the mental health benefits of the critical incident stress debriefing techniques and goals. This technique can be used in any environment where there is a focus on improving processes, increasing successes, decreasing the post-incident trauma effects of an incident, while also helping to build upon a bonded, trusting, cohesive team and supportive environment. That's what you want to get. If you have a team who has gone through a critical incident, you want that team to go back to being a successful team. And a lot of times if you have blame within a team, that's hard to do. So the purpose of this is to get them back to being a cohesive and supportive team. Next. Steps of the technique. So this is your how-to. Number one, the group immediately after an incident gathers together in a safe, calm location. We talked about safety and security. If this is possible to do near the incident site while still providing the safety aspect, this is beneficial. You don't want to have your, after your review, in, let's say, the middle of the street where someone got hit by the car. You want to be near it because the memories are clearer that way, but you want to make sure you're providing safety and a feeling of security for the people involved. Number two, a facilitator, again, leads the group through a series of questions and tells and reminds the group that there is not to be any blame placed, there are not to be any fingers pointed, and no accusations are to be made toward anyone in the group. And number three, the first question to be asked is that of what was supposed to happen. You may get different answers on this one from different individuals, depending on the type and the purpose of the group. One goal of the facilitator is to get the group to focus and agree on one basic answer. It will be very hard to compare and contrast what was supposed to happen with what actually happened if there's no agreement on this initial question. Next. Different individuals will have had different perspectives during the incident, which makes the second question, what actually happened, difficult to answer sometimes. The group needs to come to an agreement on this as well as what should have happened. Since they have different perspectives, they may have seen different things or seen things differently. They felt different emotions about what happened as it was happening. This can create different viewpoints of an incident. The group facilitator needs to work to get the group in agreement on a basic understanding of what actually happened. Number five, the next question is asked, what are the differences between what was supposed to happen and what actually happened? And this takes time. So you need to take the time to manage these answers one by one because there may be many. So it's not going to be just one answer. Well, this was our plan, this is what happened, this is the difference. You need to probably break it down into smaller what happened versus what was supposed to happen answers and listen to those one by one. Then get the group to discuss what can we learn from this. This is where it may be at times difficult to keep the group from assigning blame, but the facilitator must maintain the non-blame, non-judgmental environment. What can we learn? What can be done differently so that we can get a different, better result? Also, it is important to point out what did work, like I said, what was successful, and how we may, in the future, assure that the process is reinforced and it continues. So there should be no, this was right and this was wrong, but instead, this was the plan versus reality. We could improve here. Next steps are debriefing and diffusing are important parts of this process. Some people will be much more inclined to participate in this part than others. However, it isn't recommended that the entire group be required to attend, even if they choose not to verbally participate. Some people just don't like to talk about their feelings, but it will help for them to be in the room listening to other people's feelings. Getting the individuals to open up about their thoughts and then their feelings on what happened is the goal. Easy, basic questions are the best way to get people to start talking, such as, how did you feel when, and present one of the specific incident details that happened and was discussed in the first steps of the technique. If you can't get people to keep talking, all you really have to do is say, and how else do you feel? And what else do you want to add? And the typical to try to come up with an answer. Next. Steps 9, 10, 11. Allowing individuals to open up with their thoughts and feelings with other individuals who just went through the same event with them helps to bond the individuals together by sharing this traumatic incident. When people feel bonded by an incident, as well as by some of the emotions or thoughts related to it, they're very open to building on the team rapport, the team trust, team stability, and this will make future actions encountered by this team be more successful because they know each other in this environment better after having gone through one together. Number 10, the debriefing session is to be seen as a first step of many steps, and the number and type of follow-up steps will depend on the type of trauma or the incident. Much like CPR, so if someone stopped breathing or they're having a heart attack, you give them CPR. It's first aid, it's an intervention. This is an intervention. This is a crisis intervention technique. Then you're going to go after and get them more resources. Number 11, this process may take several hours. It's best not to rush it. And it's best to allow people to purge their thoughts and feelings at this time. However, it's also important to let them know that they will have more feelings and thoughts that develop as time goes by. Next. Letting the individuals know that the feelings and emotions and the thoughts that they are experiencing are normal will help many get through this initial phase. Also letting them know the types of things they may experience will help them to be prepared. And we mentioned this a little bit ago. I said I'd talk more about it. Preparing them for what might happen. So they've been through this incident, and then it's not over. You're going to sit and debrief, and you're going to talk about the feelings they're having right then. It's very important to kind of forewarn them and let them know that they will have other feelings develop, most likely. And I'm just listed those here. I won't read them again, but all the way through, those are the feelings that you're going to want to tell them are possible, the things that might happen, that they might experience, and letting them know again that these are normal, that they've been through something, and this is, like I said, a very predictable pattern after a trauma, that these will happen. And so letting them know that they're normal as they go through these is very helpful information. Next. So back to records and notes. I talked about sometimes you want to keep them, sometimes you don't. It is up to the group as far as what their needs may be as to whether or not they record notes of these sessions. Group notes would be most effective relating to the after-action review portion. What was learned from this incident and how could it be handled differently or positive handled the same in the future? But on the debriefing portion, individual notes in the forms of journals would be most beneficial related to the thoughts and feelings from that debriefing. However, a facilitator may help a group see that they share common feelings from the event by writing them on a board as people list them. So just maybe putting them up there and saying, I feel scared, and a facilitator writes scared on the board. Other people who may not be speaking up may be thinking, yeah, I feel scared too. And so just sharing that together is beneficial. Next. Important for long-term effectiveness. I think I've said this 10 times throughout this, but it's very important. The technique described is one to be used immediately, right after an incident, as memories are fresh and individuals who are involved are there and available. This is to lay out all the details and the thoughts about what happened. For long-term benefit and health of those involved, this first step is only a beginning. Like I said, first aid, crisis management, it is the catalyst for providing resources and help for those involved to continue on with for as long as needed. Learning from an incident helps us see the positive. Sharing our feelings with others who went through something with us helps us feel normal, less alone, and more cohesive with the group. Finding resources for long-term care helps the individuals with all of those thoughts, feelings, and emotions that will arise later that may not show up at all in this first 24 to 72 hours. Next. I am done. This is my name in case you need to get a hold of me. The Justice Clearinghouse people know how to get a hold of me. If you have any questions, I can try to address those at this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. This has been an excellent presentation and a tremendous amount of information that you provided our audience today. At this point, we do open it up for questions. If you have any questions for us, please use the question feature within the webinar tool. We'll try to address as many questions as possible. The first question that we have is, what are some of the resources that you'd recommend to our audience today where they can go and learn more about this topic? Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
You want to go through some of those?
Yeah, what I basically did, like I research anything, is I read everything I possibly can on a topic. And of course, this topic interests me because of my expertise and study in suicide intervention and suicide postvention with law enforcement. And so they kind of go together, unfortunately. With somebody who has been through a trauma, one of the things that they may experience later is thoughts of suicide. It does lead, could lead, not does, could lead to some depression at different levels. And so, you know, this has such an interest to me that I go and I try to read everything I can on it. But these are just websites basically where I found my research. But you can, for the just general person who wants to go out and learn everything they can about it, Google after action review and post-incident stress debriefing. And there are, and I'm trying to remember the name of it now, post-incident, I should know this off the top of my head, but post-incident stress debriefing was actually created by a group who is in my list. Critical Incident, no, see, now I'm not being able to do it now, but if you Google it, you'll be able to see there's an organization, and I'm thinking it's the National Critical Incident Stress Debriefing Association or something like that. They developed this. The Army, like I said, created the after action review. There have been so many different variable techniques come off of these, and so people will take this kind of like they will anything. They'll take these main techniques and go and use them in whatever their situation, how it applies to them. And since there are so many different situations and so many types of different crises and traumatic events and the people involved, there are so many variables that you can kind of morph it to your needs. As long as you stick to the basic, you know, do it immediately and make it an open, trusting environment and let people talk about their feelings and that sort of thing. As long as you stick with those basics, it will be effective. But you've got to stick with those because those are tried and true. I didn't create them, but they are well researched by these organizations and really put together to help. And so you don't want to mess with people's mental health without knowing what you're doing. It doesn't take a counselor to do this, to be a facilitator or to do an after action review. It just takes someone who is committed to following the process. So there's a lot of information out there. Like I said, if you Google it, you'll find more than you will ever have time to read.
Great, thank you so much. And our kind audience is helping out by saying that it was the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation that they think you were referencing.
Thank you. That's exactly right. Yeah. Of course, when I want to remember it, I can't. But thank you for that, yes.
Thank you to everyone who provided that. The next question that we have is, do you see much reluctance from organizations to implement these debriefings in AAR?
Yes, because, for one, like I said, the military uses the AAR. It's a regular part of what they do, and they do it because they know it works. The debriefing part is a little harder because, and one reason it's, I think, my opinion, called debriefing is people are not as willing, especially, you know, first responders are tough people. They see a lot of hard things. They don't want to think that they need to be going through some sort of counseling. They're going to say, I'm fine, you know. So they call debriefing. It's a debriefing of your experience. It's a rundown. It's here's what happened. Here's kind of what it made me feel like. And people are okay with that. But the after-action review, I think it could be more widely used than it is. It's used in the military. But like I said, in businesses, I think anything you do, and I think in families, it could be used as, you know, here's how our vacation went. This is how we wanted it to go. Here's how it actually went. What do we want to do differently next year? I mean, it just depends on what your need is. I think you could apply it. And with children particularly, I like a lot of working with children with their emotions, and I'm a proponent of journaling. So I think it can be more widely used than it is, but I think the resistance to it may be because it has to do with it having a counseling aspect, and people don't feel qualified, I think, maybe to provide that, which is where the long-term resources come in. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. I think I'm done, and then I'm not.
Thank you so much for everything that you've provided to us. You know, just as an aside, a number of folks have been asking about today's presentation. This presentation is being recorded. It will be available on the Justice Clearinghouse website to all current members. If you're not a member, you can join today, and then you'd have access to not only this webinar, but all the other webinars that we have on archived. Finally, the one thing I just want to, as we wrap up today's session, is I just want to ask you, Amy, if you could provide our audience with some closing remarks today.
Sure. I would really just encourage anybody who is a first responder, that's probably most of our audience, a first responder or someone who trains first responders or manages first responders. Probably that would be my primary focus if I were to send this out to someone who could benefit from it. Really to always self-assess, always try to learn what we could do better. Give yourself credit all the time for what you did well and what worked and what was successful. And then do provide resources. Always get help. I mean, it's so much better to follow through and get those long-term resources, whether it's counseling or just getting your family involved and knowing that you've gone through something and they may see signs that come up later. Really just follow through and think of these things as long-term and not, will that happen, but now it's over and I need to move on. Give yourself a little patience and a little credit and self-love, if nothing else. And same with someone else that you may know that has gone through something, bear with them and help them and provide them the resources.
Amy, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the Justice Clearinghouse for everything that you've done to help prepare for today's session. Not only has Ms. Morgan volunteered her time so graciously to provide this training today, but she's also provided a number of other trainings for us previously, and I look forward to continuing our relationship and helping address these concerns with the field. So thank you so much for all that you've done.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
So with that, this actually concludes today's webinar for the day. If you have any questions or follow-up, if we did not address your question, please feel free to reach out to us following today's presentation, and we'll make sure that we schedule a time to talk with you offline. And with that, everybody stay safe. This concludes today's webinar, and have a great day. Bye-bye. Thank you again, Amy.
Thank you.